Hey everyone, my name is Kay, and this is Dark Tales from the Road. Hey everybody, thank you so much for being here with me today. Before we get started, I want to highlight another featured podcast of the week, and we are talking about The Activity Continues. This is such a unique podcast because they cover spooky, all that, but they're also looking at other podcasts, different stories, and really exploring everything, not just being, a true crime being this or that. They are so open to everything. It is so awesome. These ladies do such an amazing job. So let's go ahead and listen to their trailer.
There's some crazy going on out here.
Hello. This is Amy.
And this is Megan.
And this is the Activity Continues podcast. Each week, we dissect an episode of the TV show The Dead Files. Sort of was in a trance-like state, woke up, came to, and was spinning a knife.
My God! We also talk about other TV shows, movies, and podcasts, paranormal and otherwise.
Really good podcast. I really like them. They're really fun, and they do a really good job of covering their cases. They do lots of research, so.
Yep. We've both had paranormal experiences through our lives and continue to do so. So we talk about those things too. So I have to tell you I had this weird thing happen that
Tell
was
me.
I call it like a glitch in the Matrix.
You have a lot of Matrix glitches.
I do.
And we also share listener paranormal stories.
But that was my experience at Villisca.
Join us as we talk about true crime, paranormal, and other creepy shit.
Mix up a cocktail.
Or a mocktail. Don't worry, Steve's driving.
Sometimes that wine cream just hits the spot.
I
you
know.
what I'm saying?
Sometimes it does.
Hop in the caddy and join us for a wild ride when the activity continues.
I got pretty excited.
Call to arms. Form our cult.
Yeah.
We'll gossip and drink and talk about ghosts.
I'm in.
All right, thank you guys so much for listening to that, and definitely go check them out on social media and everywhere that you get your podcasts. So, very excited for today, switching things up a little bit because I'm going to go explore a cult. I know I've been doing a lot of spooky and I have more spooky to come, but this one really popped out at me. I've never heard of this cult either. So I'm so excited to show this one to you guys. We're going to be heading to Mahopac, New York, and we are going to be exploring the OSG cult, which stands for the Odyssey Study Group. And the names sound just so innocent, but this group was very far from innocent. There's a lot that happened, and they are allegedly still going strong today. So very interesting. If you're new here, I like to do a little bit of history. I love history, so I do history of the state that it is in and the city that it's in, because I want to get a background of, where it's located and what it has to do with this area, why they chose this area, things like that. I just think it gives a more rich outlook on things with the story. I'm rambling. I don't know what I'm saying, but I hope this makes sense. So we're going to start with New York. So there's a Native American group. I will get this pronunciation right. Haudenosaunee. I hope I got it. It's a very long word, but I did look it up. Anyways, they came into the Adirondack region of New York between 2,000 and 4,000 years ago. And like a lot of the places in the U.S., Native Americans have been a part of it for tens of thousands of years. And so when they came in, they created this alliance with the Iroquois. And it became known as the Iroquois Confederacy by the French, because the French was there at the time. New York has a crazy history, a very long history. So mine is very condensed. And if you want to know more, definitely go check it out. And it actually, so the alliance really became democratic, and it started what was called the Great Law of Peace, and it promoted using reason over force when it comes to justice, health, and righteousness. And so these thinkings actually helped inspire the founding fathers, and it said that Benjamin Franklin actually used a lot of that speech for the US Constitution. So that's pretty cool how influenced they were, you know. So around the 17th century was when the French and the Dutch arrived. They worked well with the Anglicans. They traded for guns and ammunition while they traded with furs. But as always, you know, the French and the Dutch, they bring diseases and they're just wiping people out. Then they're starting to encroach on their territory, take their territory, force them to migrate. And it became violent. Like even some of the indigenous people, they were becoming violent. They were raiding different European properties. The people who were, especially the people who were encroaching on them. Sorry for my dog. And they would capture the women and children. It really became very violent due to what the French and Dutch were, you know, being violent towards them is very, very sad. And so then during the American Revolution, the Mohawks in the area, they actually aided the British. So they were going against Americans to fight for the British to, like, that's puts into perspective how terrible things were going, you know. But by the end of the war, the Mohawk people, they actually they were driven out of the area and moved up to Canada. So again, the Dutch and French were in, the English are coming in, and they were the first to explore and colonize the area that is now New York. The Dutch came in 1624 around the Hudson River, and they established the colony of New Amsterdam on Manhattan Island. The English, they believed they had claims to an area known as New Netherland. They actually waged 3 different wars because of this land. They fought against the Dutch in the 1600s multiple times until finally in 1664, the New Netherland area was passed to the British, and they renamed the area New York after James II, who was the Duke of York, the son of King Charles I. I actually had no clue about how New York was named. So now that you really think about it, you're like, oh, that makes sense. Like, yeah. So New York was one of the 13 original colonies, and it was a huge, huge part of the American Revolution. If you have seen the play Hamilton, you know that, you know, Hamilton's in New York trying to get banks established while, you know, Washington, D.C. becomes the capital, all that. So if you haven't, and you really like history, especially American Revolution, British versus American history, go see Hamilton. The songs are catchy, but you learn a lot. It's so good. Even if you're not a huge musical fan, it's definitely more modern than My Fair Lady, Sound of Music, Les Mis, things like that. I love musicals, so. Anyway, so quick tidbit here. The American Revolution is also known as the Revolutionary War. So I apologize if I use both words. I just realized I did both of them in my notes. So getting back into it, about a third of the war was fought in New York, which is crazy. There was the Battle of Saratoga, and it was considered the major turning point in the war. The colonists defeated the British and ended up convincing King Louis XVI to ally with them, to start to work with them against the British. And because of their military and their financial support, they were such massive contributors to this that really made the impact for the colonists to get victory at the Battle of Yorktown in 1781, which marked the war's end. I could go on for days. about this. The Constitution was ratified in 1788, and New York City became the first capital of the United States. Then, April 30th, 1789, George Washington was inaugurated as the nation's first president at Federal Hall, which is located on Wall Street in New York. As we all know, immigration at the New York ports at Ellis Island was massive. So between 1892 and 1954, millions of people immigrated into the New York harbor and went through Ellis Island to become citizens. It's said that 40% of Americans can actually trace their ancestors to the Ellis Island port of entry, which is insane. Millions of these European immigrants came to really flee religious persecution, famines, rising taxes, and really saw the promise of freedom and prosperity. The New York population increased in 1850 from 3 million people to 9 million people by 1930. And a lot of these immigrants came from Ireland, Germany. There's a huge Chinese population that settled during the gold rush. Italians came in, and then in the 20th century, you saw a lot of the Jewish people from Eastern Europe come over also. Black Americans are also majorly included in that because they have been around since the colonial days when they were brought over by the Dutch as slaves. And New York is a huge part of the abolitionist movement, like the activists Frederick Douglass and Harriet Tubman being a huge part of that. A lot of them came to New York during the Great Migration. That was in the 1910s to the 1970s, and they were coming from southern farming states like Virginia and the Carolinas and Georgia. They were coming to the northern cities to get factory jobs and to escape the Jim Crow laws that were happening also. And along with them coming from the South, they were also getting people from Jamaica and West Indies. And with all of them coming in with all this different culture, it really sparked artists, scholars, and poetry and art, music, philosophy, and dance. And that is known as the Harlem Renaissance. Another huge part is women's suffrage movement that happened in 1848. This was at the Seneca Falls Convention in Seneca Falls, New York. And it was led by Sojourner Truth, Elizabeth Cady Stanton, and Susan B. Anthony. And so with all of the work and activism that they put into it, they were able to ratify the 19th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, which gave women the right to vote. It's also a huge part of the LGBTQ community. I'm sorry if I missed anything on that acronym. If I did, I'm really sorry, but you are all included in this. So the late 19th and early 20th centuries was when the LGBTQ community formed in New York City. It's actually known as the birthplace of the LGBTQ movement because of the 1969 Stonewall Uprising in Greenwich Village. And so that really inspired this group of people to really push for gay rights. So even though 1920s is when the LGBTQ community really started coming out and becoming activists for themselves and the others, but it really took off in New York after the Stonewall Uprising. And if you don't know about Stonewall Uprising, it's a very crazy story. It's a very good one to know, and I know there are a ton of podcasts about it. I would love to cover it someday, but it's definitely look into that one, you guys. Okay, New York is the largest city in the state, and it's home to the New York Stock Exchange and many international economic centers. Some facts here. So it got statehood on July 26th, 1788. So Manhattan comes from a Lenape Native American word, and it roughly translates to, quote, a place where we gather wood to make bows and arrows, because it was the tools that they relied on when they were hunting. The New York Post, which is a popular tabloid, established in 1801. Like, that's pretty crazy. And again, if you've seen Hamilton, this is familiar, or if you love history. So it was actually known at that time as a Federalist newspaper, and it was called the New York Evening Post. And it was created by Alexander Hamilton. And he was an author of a lot of the papers that were put into it. And then, if you didn't know, he was the nation's first Secretary of Treasury. The Statue of Liberty, it was from France. It was a gift from them to really honor the U.S. and during all of the wars to really come into freedom and democracy and the alliance that they had made during the American Revolution. So it was put up in 1886, and at the time it was known as Bedloe Island. It's now Liberty Island, right in the New York Harbor. And it's known as a welcoming symbol to the 15 million immigrants who entered the United States through New York, which I think is really, really cool. And after the towns of Woodstock and Wallkill refused permission to host what became known as Woodstock, it's like the most famous musical festival. Like, everybody knows about it. There was actually a dairy farmer in the town of Bethel, so real close to those who agreed to let them be on his land. And it was known as, quote, 3 days of peace and music. And it was all musical acts, and it was August 15th, 1969. So then it became known as the Woodstock Music Festivals, and there were over 400,000 people there. And most of them just came for free. Like, they didn't pay to get in because it was so unorganized. They were so unprepared. They were not expecting such a large crowd. Another historic thing I definitely recommend looking into. And last, the National Baseball Hall of Fame is located in Cooperstown, New York. So let's go to the city that we will find ourselves in. It's called Mahopac. It's not spelled the way it sounds. Well, kind of, but I did have to look it up. It originally was inhabited by the Native American group, the Wappinger people. They were part of an Algonquin tribe. And after the war, the British refused to give them their land back. And so a lot of those Native Americans completely abandoned the area and moved towards Massachusetts, where a lot of other displaced Native American groups were at the time. Then they had farmers and their families who started to migrate into Mahopac because they wanted to get out of Cape Cod and get off their rented land and be able to use their own land. And what came with them were wheelwrights and blacksmiths, and they started setting up shops to really help out these farmers. In 1812 was the incorporation of Putnam County, and that is in the Mahopac area, and it started to grow and grow and grow. By the 19th century, it actually became a summer resort community. Then here comes the railroads, and vacationers are actually able to get from New York City a lot easier. And they even had like horse-drawn carriages, so they would pick them up at the train station, and like very fancy. And after the Civil War, though, the direct rail started happening and growing, and that created just massive boom of people coming into that area. So again, it was primarily a summer resort. Then after World War II, the highways came in, and that made travel by automobile more convenient. And so then the area evolved into a year-round community, and a lot of the residents there make their commute into New York City. And then last here for this, during the summer of 1956, a man named Richard Yates, if you guys are familiar with him, he moved to Mahopac with his family, and he was an author. He wrote his most famous novel called Revolutionary Road in that estate that he lived in there. It's an amazing book, and the movie is amazing also. I really liked it, so definitely check that out. All right, enough of that. Let's get into this cult, guys. I hope it blows your mind as much as it blew my mind. So my information here I've gotten from a bunch of different articles, but I will kind of talk about which articles before I get into the meat of it. That makes sense. So starting out, I found an article called Odyssey Study Group Cult Still Going Strong After Death of Charismatic Leader Sharon Gans. This was written by Isabel Vincent, July 9th of 2022. So that's the article I got this information from. So it has many names. It's not just the Odyssey Study Group. It's also known as The Work. It's also known as a Fourth Way School, if you guys have heard of those. But with those names, they have been known and accused of sexual and child abuse, as well as siphoning cash from its members. And the leaders of this group were ridiculously wealthy. And it helps, like, that's where your money was going. Like, they could tell that it was helping them lead this extravagant life all over the place, because they had places in Manhattan, Boston, Hamptons, and Mexico, and we'll go into that further. It was registered as a nonprofit in 2001. I have some more history down the line, but this is kind of and so this was in 2022, and it said that it had currently had 200 members on the East Coast. And so one of the former members, after being in the cult, he became a cult expert, and this was the post that this article was from. But his name is Rick Allen Ross, and he said this about it. He said, quote, "It's a very bizarre kind of group because they're generally wealthy and highly educated Harvard, Yale, and Wharton types." He actually was the author of a book called Cults Inside Out, How People Get In and Can Get Out. And then there is a group called the Cult Education Institute, and he is the executive director there. That's where I got a ton of information. It was so helpful. So Ross goes on to say, quote, "When people say that people in New York are much too smart to get involved in a cult, it just means that the cult is very sophisticated and slick." And so he says that because the survival in the OSG group really was about cash flow. Paying for things, the members paying for things, and then you survived that group. You know, you were not kicked out, you were not beaten, you were not this, that, and the other, you know. Okay. So the leader of the group, her name is Shara Gans Horn, and she actually died in January of 21 from COVID complications. She was 85, and at that time, this group was generating $1.2 million a year just in member dues that they had them pay in cash. That's insane. That's insane. They would meet either in this office building or one of the churches at the Upper West Side Church. And now that she has passed, it is allegedly run by 4 members who were very long time members, and that Sharon, I'm going to call her Sharon because her last name is weird, she personally handpicked them. And a lot of this information started because of a class action lawsuit. So this lawsuit was filed in Manhattan State Supreme Court in 2021, and it was brought about by a woman named Stephanie Rosenberg and another woman, Marjorie Hockman. So they were able to flee the cult after they were there for years, and they claimed that they were used by the group for slave labor. They, cooking and cleaning for the meetings twice a week, and then they would make them participate in the renovations of their luxury properties, and do the construction and the painting, all this stuff, and they were not getting paid for it. Continuing on with Ross, who is the the main guy in this first article here. He says, quote, through methods traditionally utilized to groom, intimidate, weaken, gaslight, and exploit their victims, OSG coerced and tricked its members into, among other things, paying its monthly fees and performing many hours of labor without compensation. Sharon was really known as being extremely vindictive, and she had intentionally excluded her own children from her will and actually passed all of her money on to the 4 members that took over. Millions and millions of dollars. Ross says, quote, she was like a human wrecking ball. Ross goes on to say, quote, she was like a human wrecking ball. She was incredibly vindictive. And it was said that like Sharon would actually break up marriages between cult members, and she would encourage them to have affairs with other members, and they actually she would put their children up for adoption, like the members' children. What? And like I said, she cut her kids out of the will, and they are completely estranged from her. And Ross really puts all his faith into that the cult was a success because Sharon was such a ridiculous narcissist. And then an article from the New York Post, October 5th of 2022 by Priscilla DeGregory. She wrote that the Manhattan Supreme Court Justice named Lori Sattler, she actually threw out the case, the class action lawsuit, because they didn't sufficiently prove that they were expected compensation from OSG at the time during their membership. It just showed that they worked there. Like it's a little confusing, but in the end, the women were not able to show that they were expecting payment for while they were members there. So another article here, this I'm going to read word for word because I cut out some, but because this is about a man named Spencer Schneider. He's a former OSG member and has written the book that I posted on Instagram yesterday, Manhattan Cult Story, My Unbelievable True Story of Sex, Crimes, Chaos, and Survival. And so I did cut out parts of this article, but I'm going to read it word for word so we get Schneider's full story. So this is from the U.S. Sun, March 16th of 2023, which is good. It's very updated, and it's by Luke Kenton. So we go, quoting the whole article, and quote, this is a quote from Spencer Schneider. The whole thing is a pyramid scheme and a hoax, said Spencer Schneider, a former OSG member who has written Manhattan Cult Story, My Unbelievable True Story of Sex, Crimes, Chaos, and Survival, which is a tell-all book out now about the cult. He said, quote, it's a long-haul hoax, and Sharon was a genius at going after vulnerable people with money. According to Schneider, who spent 23 years as part of the group until 2013, after suffering what he told the USN was a complete mental breakdown. Members paid $400 in cash in dues to Sharon, who would then direct them to help renovate her compounds in Manhattan, the Hamptons, upstate New York, Montana, and even Mexico. In one such incident, Schneider claims Sharon commanded a room full of students to reveal their childhood trauma. At Sharon's direction, Schneider divulged to her and a room of his peers how he was sexually abused by a male camp counselor when he was just 14 years old. Schneider had apparently never told anyone about the abuse before. But instead of reacting with sympathy, Sharon allegedly told him and the other students that gathered that Schneider was not the victim of abuse, but rather that he had been experimenting with his attacker. Just disgusting. Oh my God. Sorry. Okay, continuing on with the article. She also advised him to simply cease thinking about the incident, he claims. On multiple occasions thereafter, Sharon openly questioned whether Schneider was heterosexual and intentionally left Schneider with the impression that his childhood sexual abuse was his fault. In this way, Sharon obtained sensitive information about Schneider, another method used by the organization to ensure Schneider's continued participation in it, and used shame and humiliation to maintain control over him. However, according to Schneider and the other former members, Sharon actually used these lectures to bully, humiliate, and brainwash members of the school, emotionally beating them into compliance and cultivating a culture of fear to deter any detractors. Schneider filed a lawsuit against the estate of Sharon's and her alleged successors in December, claiming to be the victim of a decades-long scheme in which he was manipulated and terrorized into performing thousands of hours of unpaid labor. Filed in federal court in Brooklyn, New York, Schneider alleges violations of federal human trafficking laws and seeking damages for years of forced labor. Including, as part of the suit, is a litany of disturbing allegations outlining various cases of abuse Schneider claims to have either witnessed or suffered firsthand during the time in Sharon's orbit. It was common practice for Sharon and the members of her inner circle to obtain sensitive and private information about OSG students to de-incentivize them for leaving the group for fear the information could be used against them, Schneider claims in his suit. Under a subheading titled Collateral, Schneider lists several instances in which Sharon allegedly used sensitive information to keep other OSG members in line. At times when a student broke a rule, including by failing to adhere to one of Sharon's directives, Sharon disclosed the personal information and sensitive information obtained by her through members of the inner circle about the students to others, reads the lawsuit. Sharon frequently and without warning openly discussed during class students' marital problems and intimate details about their sex lives and encouraged adultery among students. Quote, Schneider lived in fear that Sharon would publicly discuss intimate details of his and his wife's sex life, encouraging his spouse to sleep with other students of Sharon's choosing or demand that Schneider and his wife divorce. After he left OSG in 2013, Schneider claims that Sharon told other students that he was gay and had never once had sexual relations with his wife. Schneider separated from his spouse in 2009 under the instruction of Sharon. His ex-wife was not named in the lawsuit, but the U.S. Sun identified her as Cynthia May in an exclusive report last month. May, who's now 67, is the mother of actress Joanne Tucker. Tucker has been married to Star Wars star Adam Driver for over a decade. So again, Schneider's ex-wife is Cynthia May. Cynthia May is Joanne Tucker's mother, and Joanne Tucker is married to Adam Driver. 6 degrees of separation there. So, continuing on the article, May's involvement in OSG was confirmed by Schneider, who wrote a tell-all book about the alleged cult last year. While May was referred to under the pseudonym Beth in Schneider's book, the U.S. Sun was first able to verify her identity through divorce records, which Schneider later confirmed. While he is unsure if May is still a member of the group, she once was a teacher, quote-unquote, at OSG, Schneider said. Being anointed with the title of teacher was considered the highest honor inside the group and akin to being Sharon's lieutenant, he added. In Sharon's absence, teachers would lead lessons on her behalf, conducting the class just as she would. Quote, a teacher is like a lieutenant for Sharon, kind of running the classes when she's not there, keeping tabs on other students and doing whatever Sharon would do, he explained. There were her eyes, her ears, and her enforcers. Sharon didn't show up all the time, so the teachers would run the class and do everything she did. There is no suggestion that Adam Driver or Joanne Tucker are in any way involved with the group. However, Schneider said he thinks Joanne was, quote-unquote, aware of who Sharon was, adding that she and her siblings hated the eccentric sect leader. He also said that while the children weren't permitted to attend OSG meetings, they were periodically invited to retreats with the group. Schneider's son once attended a retreat in Montana, he said. It's unclear whether Tucker or any of her siblings ever interacted directly with Sharon or other members of the OSG clan. He says Driver and Tucker have no involvement in it whatsoever. None, adamantly stated Schneider. Quote, I know Adam and Joanne very well. They're my stepdaughter and son-in-law. They have no involvement in it, but I think Joanne knows about Sharon. She knows about that. But they all have no involvement in it at all, and they don't like Sharon, the kids. They all hated her, he added. They all hated her. Continuing on with the article, it says, Sharon immediately instructed Schneider to get together with May, telling him, you'd be perfect together, he recounted. Under Sharon's instruction, the pair started dating. Within weeks, they were engaged. Within months, they were married, much to the delight of their orange-haired overlord, which is Sharon. It was one day in 1998, after receiving a phone call from Sharon, that Spencer, then 37, began questioning his involvement in OSG, having spent the better part of a decade in its ranks. As Schneider remembers it, Sharon called him to inform him she was worried about May, then 42, about having a child. She said, quote, I don't like the idea of Cynthia getting pregnant. At her age, it's potentially dangerous, she apparently told him per his book. Quote, the child could have Down syndrome and you would have to put it up for adoption. As Schneider tried to assure Sharon all would be fine, she told him he should have sex with a 19-year-old stepdaughter, Hannah, instead. Quote, no, Spencer, what you can do is impregnate Hannah. She can carry the baby and you and Beth can raise the baby as your own, Sharon allegedly instructed. When asked if she was serious, he said she told him, of course, I'm sure Hannah would be happy to do this. She's still young. She would do it for you. The true identity of who Hannah is not clear. But Schneider refused Sharon's direction, and thankfully he said she didn't push the matter further. In the book, Schneider also recounts the moment he informed his wife of the sickening suggestion. While May shook her head in disbelief, it wasn't enough to make either of them consider leaving OSG at the time. Quote, Sharon was suggesting that I engage in incest to conceive a child, writes Schneider in his book. Quote, this child will be the grandchild of my wife, the child of my stepdaughter, and the niece or nephew of my other stepchildren. It was repugnant and I never considered it for a second, but I did overlook it. Not because I thought Sharon was demented, but because I thought in my compromised condition, Sharon was a free spirit, uninhibited and unconstrained from all conventions, and that someone of her hippie mindset would of course recommend this. I gave her a pass, a big one. So sad. Schneider and May eventually conceived a child together naturally in 1999. He tried to convince his wife to leave OSG in the early 2000s after an exodus among long-serving members, he claims. However, May refused and was later awarded the title of teacher for her loyalty. Quote, I've been with Sharon so long in school, May reported to have told him, if I left it, would I be admitting I wasted my whole life on a fraud? Reluctantly, Spencer agreed to stay too, as he was scared that Sharon would try to tear his family apart if he decided to leave. However, his marriage to May began to unravel by the close of the decade, with Schneider believing his wife valued the group more than she did their relationship. Sharon, after being informed of their issues, ordered them to see a marriage counselor she had personally chosen. The counselor, Schneider believes, was just a mouthpiece for Sharon and her twisted rhetoric. His belief, he says, was evidenced by one interaction in which the doctor asked May, quote, did it ever occur to you that maybe the reason your husband and you don't have sex anymore is because he's a homosexual? Schneider took the question to be a reference to the childhood sexual abuse he disclosed during one of Sharon's lectures years earlier. Despite their best effort to reconcile, Schneider and May split in 2009. According to his book, she turned to him one night that year and casually told him, oh, I hired a divorce lawyer today. Where do you want me to serve the papers on you? Schneider immediately suspected Sharon's involvement. Surely enough, the following day, he received a call from his increasingly estranged mentor telling him he needed to settle the divorce quickly, amicably, and out of court. Under Sharon's proposed settlement, Schneider would have to give up complete custody of his son. Schneider, an attorney, refused the terms and instead settled his divorce through the courts, retaining partial custody. After years of alleged bullying, instances of public shaming, and other emotional and physical abuse, Schneider finally decided to leave OSG in 2013. Having lost his marriage with his legal practice suffering significant financial hardships, he suffered a complete mental breakdown in late 2012, before he really began questioning his association with Sharon and what OSG really was. Quote, I honestly, I didn't think it was a cult until the day after I left, and then it just all tumbled down, Schneider told the U.S. Sun last year. Quote, then it was like, oh wow, that was a cult. I'll never forget that feeling. Schneider said it has taken 10 years and counting to rebuild his life after leaving OSG. In his lawsuit, Schneider says that during his more than 2 decades under Sharon's spell, he was required to perform numerous duties, including construction, cooking gourmet meals for Sharon, caring for her dying husband, and acting as her chauffeur, all in the name of personal growth. At the same time, Schneider says he was shelling out monthly for courses that he was told would make him better and more successful person. In total, he estimates he paid the group more than $100,000 in tuition and other payments. OSG required members to follow a strict set of rules and punish them who strayed, the lawsuit said. The group also systematically isolated its members from the outside world while also controlling all of their interactions within the organization, per the court papers. Sharon, together with the organization and the rest of the inner circle, commanded students who to date and have sex with, when and who they marry, when to have children, when not to have children, when to have children, and give them up for adoption, when to pay, how much to pay in child support, then to shun their children, when to divorce, whether to have abortions, and whether to have a vasectomy or a tubal ligation, the suit alleges. Quote, to maintain the control and ensure the students adhere to their whims, Sharon engaged in unpredictable and outrageous conduct and in an instant would deliberately upend the lives of her students by making a demand of the students regarding their personal lives. Whew. Yeah, so that was, I had to include all of his stuff because it's insane and it's so sad. She would literally take the members' children and put them up for adoption. What the? Okay, a quick little story here. Rosie O'Donnell actually got tied in with the cult. This article is from the New York Post, November 11th of 19, says Rosie O'Donnell recalls brush with alleged cult by Annabelle Sosa. It's short, so quote, Odyssey Study Group, the accused cult that the Post reported have been operating under the radar in New York for decades, had 15 minutes of fame in 2002 thanks to an unexpected collaboration with comedian Rosie O'Donnell. The funny woman told the Post in 2001 she heard of a new documentary short about a New York theater troupe volunteering at an orphanage in the country of Georgia that was in need of a narrator. O'Donnell, who was an adoptive mother and sits on the board of a child advocacy nonprofit, offered to do it free of charge. It wasn't until next year when the flick called, quote, Artists and Orphans, a True Drama, was nominated for an Oscar and things took a strange turn. The group asked me to meet them at a Russian tea room to celebrate, which I thought was strange. It was very extravagant. We had caviar, she said. I went expecting it to be a group of amazing, philanthropic, young, open-minded artists like in the movie, she added. Then a reporter reached out and told her the filmmakers were part of an alleged cult helmed by flick star Sharon Gans, whose group had been accused of racism and homophobia. Quote, I hung up the phone and called the woman who I had gone through for the initial talk about the Oscar nomination. I said, please tell me this is a joke, the openly gay comic recalled. So when I first read this article, side note, I was like, why did they need to say she was an openly gay comic? Well, back up a little bit and remember that this group has been accused of homophobia and they were also accused of not letting any members in who were gay. So that's why. Back to the article. Quote, after that, it was just dead silence, and I thought, oh dear God, this is the worst thing that could have happened. The connection and allegations generated headlines across the country, with the Post reporting cultists hijack Rosie's voice. O'Donnell publicly demanded her name and voice be removed from the documentary. David B. Goldstein, an attorney for the filmmakers at the time, told the Post that allegations of the movie being, quote, the work of some kind of nefarious cult are completely baseless. Furthermore, the inflammatory accusation that certain people affiliated with the film are involved in an organization that endangers the welfare of children or discriminates against gays and lesbians or families without foundation, said the attorney. O'Donnell says she never heard back from the filmmaker and 17 years later remains uncertain whether her name and voice are still attached to the movie. That's horrible. She was trying to do something great and amazing, and it's like they got nominated for an Oscar, so it really was this amazing thing. And I just really don't like this cult after reading about it. Like, oh God. So this is from the first article that we went through, the one by Isabel Vincent from July 9th of 2022. I made this a separate part from that. So Sharon and her husband, he was a playwright, they co-founded the OSG in San Francisco in the 1970s, and her husband died in 2007. At the time, it was known as the Theater of All Possibilities, and it was set up to put on plays. It was still a group, though. You know, it wasn't just, hey, let's do plays. It was still a cult at that time because they were bringing all these people in, and it became this school, this teachings, but it was because of a man named George Ivanovich Gurdjieff. It's Russian, I'm so sorry. And it was on his teachings, and he was a Russian mystic and a philosopher. He also inspired the group Fellowship of Friends, which is a California-based cult with that Google employees are very much about. So Sharon and her husband, they shut down their San Francisco theater in 1978 because they learned that the police and social welfare were investigating them because a former student who came forward alleging that they participated in child neglect, sexual abuse, and beatings. No, thank you. And then they eventually fled to Montana. They ended up in New York City in the 1980s, and that's where they established OSG. And they lived in these just amazing, opulent homes. They, a top floor apartment in Greenwich Village, where it says where actress Marissa Tomei was their next door neighbor. And it is believed that the cult will continue. She has passed. There's the 4 members that are running it, and they say it will continue even though she passed. They used to call her, Sharon, the, quote, philosopher queen, and that it had really hit the group hard that she had passed. But Schneider comes into play and he says, quote, it's no different than Scientology. That group continued even after the death of their founder. Crazy. So that is the OSG cult in New York. From what I found, I believe they are still going, but it's really crazy. They recruit members from the elite in New York, and they're able to shell out this money for membership and all these classes that are going to make them better and do better. And in the end, it was just a massive area for grooming and abuse that I really hope does not continue this day. I really hope that this cult can be shut down, because if you look at the history of cults, it's just insane how people are so drawn to them and get sucked in. But, and you can judge it any way you want, but then at the same time, everything is like a little cult around us. Like, and I'm just as guilty because I see one ad for something, go in, oh, I like this, I'll get that. And I get the one thing. And then I'm like, oh wait, I want to try everything. So I'm buying everything. And even self-help books and MLMs are a big one because they always do a bunch of trainings on how to do better, how to make better sales, be strong in yourself. So it's all around us, but it's not as big as the cults where, you all live there. in harmony together. And yeah, cults are just crazy. And there's there's a lot of very publicized cults like the Manson family and Heaven's Gate, the Branch Davidians. That's also a really good one. I need to do more cults, I think. And then the Children of God, Jim Jones, the People's Temple. There's a million podcasts about this also, so I definitely recommend that. So there's a lot out there, and even more. I hope that this one kind of opened your eyes to other cults, and a lot of the cults are very similar when it comes to things like this, and like Warren Jeffs and things like that. So I hope you guys enjoyed this one. I probably could have made this episode like 2 hours long with all of the information, but I wanted to definitely give you guys just 40 minutes worth of information. And so I hope you guys liked it. If you're interested in this cult, definitely go check out. There's just article upon article upon article about it, especially the lawsuits that they've been through, are going through, things like that. So thank you guys so much. I really, really appreciate all of your support. So join us next Wednesday. We are episode 44. We're going to be going to Massachusetts. And there's a lot in Massachusetts that I could have picked. But I wanted to do something I'd never heard of before. I hope you guys like this one if you've heard about it. I'm not going to tell you what it is. But yeah, so next Wednesday we're going to Massachusetts. On the 13th, which is Thursday the 13th, we have another bonus dark tale. Very excited. And then Wednesday the 19th, we're going to be going to New Mexico. And Wednesday the 26th, we are going to Michigan. So that rounds out April for us, which is completely insane. I don't know what's happening. But yeah, I hope you guys are all doing well. Spring is coming, and I think that helps lift so many spirits. And as always, I'm always thankful and grateful for what you guys do for support for my podcast. If you would like to follow me on social media, I have an Instagram, which is at Dark Tales from the Road. I have a TikTok. I have a YouTube where I do the full episode if you'd rather listen to it on YouTube. And I have a Twitter. I don't have Facebook anymore. I decided to delete it and move on. So yeah. And if you'd like to support the show, all of your support pretty much goes into technology. I'm paying off my brand new computer. If you listen to early episodes, you know how desperately I needed a brand new computer. But I have a Patreon if you guys would like to support the show. And that's it. Thank you guys so much for joining me on this beautiful Wednesday. We will see you next Wednesday in Massachusetts. Bye, guys.